Every time I show pictures of my Warhammer games, I inevitably get an avalanche of comments that are furious about my unpainted models. Seeing grey on the tabletop is an absolutely heinous sin which can cause a person to projectile vomit with unbridled rage, and fielding even a single grey mini is seen as a more disrespectful and shameful action than if you just dropped trowel and took a dump right on the centre objective. Look, I get it. Unpainted models sully an otherwise exquisite board, and it just looks bad and lazy, and it makes games feel far less epic. I understand that it would have been best to not play the game at all until I invested hundreds of hours into painting my models, and that by playing with my unpainted models to be able to learn the game and have fun, I should be shunned as a heretic, be paraded through the streets while being pelted by rotten fruits, rocks, and other household objects, then drenched in Nuln oil and burnt at the stake. Is not only even flammable. People are so averse to seeing unpainted plastic that they will buy boxes of models just for them to sit on a shelf, unopened for eternity, so they don't even have to lay their eyes upon even a smidge of greyness. Well, I'm here to tell those that naysay today it's okay to play with grey, and I think the repulsion to not having a fully painted army isn't as much as an issue as it should be. You might be thinking that this entire video is made just to try and justify my own laziness so I don't have to paint my models with any urgency, and you'd be right, but you didn't have to say it out loud. Now, there are sensible reasons as to why someone might be justified in defenestrating you if you play with unpainted minis. The biggest of these, and one which I absolutely agree with, is that it means you can display your painted minis to show off to everyone, and the easiest way to do that is if you grab yourself a mag case from Tabletop Stronghold. That's right, it's sponsored time! I've been trapped floating here through the incredible power of this wizard's magnetic powers. The same magnetic powers that are used in the Mag Case 2.0. These MDF cases come with magnets to secure your beautifully painted minis of any size to the adjustable metal trays to make transportation safe, secure, and easier than ever before. Your minis are safe, even if you are also attacked by a wizard who wants to use your model case as a stepladder. Right now, you can get up to 40% off all products in their Black Friday sale. As always, there is free shipping from the Wizard's Tower in West Virginia to the USA, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand, and most of the EU. So once again, thank you very much, Tabletop Stronghold, for kindly sponsoring this video. Check the links in the description to get your hands on an MDF case or MDF terrain. tabletopstronghold.com. There, I've done the sponsor now. Can you please let me do The actual biggest reasons for not allowing unpainted models is at large events like a tournament or a narrative campaign event, those kind of things. For tournaments especially, having a painting mandate means that players can't just cobble together or 3D print an army and field the latest meta list without any effort. And from my single experience, granted, part of the fun of going to the tournament is to see everyone's painted armies, and it wouldn't be nearly as interesting to participate in if everyone was just fielding a bunch of grey meta models without any personality. Whilst I'm someone who is more interested in the game side of 40k and AOS and other war games, I'm not so much of a capital G gamer that I don't appreciate the hobby or the lore. Because Warhammer is a combination of game, hobby, and lore, it makes a lot of sense for a tournament to celebrate all of those components that make up Warhammer. I think everyone who is a fan of 40k probably has some sort of balance between these three different elements. There are those, however, that exemplify the extremes to each of these. There's the power gamer who couldn't care less about what the units represent, has no interest in painting anything, and just wants to play the game. There's the hobbyist who just buys things because they look cool and they love to paint or kitbash, but probably isn't even aware that Warhammer 40k is an actual game that people play, or understand that an Orc Boy, an Intercessor, a Zangor, and a Kassakin aren't exactly going to become friends and go on a merry adventure together, even if that does sound like a fun idea. That does sound like a fun idea. And finally, there's the lore master who could possibly paint or play the game because they spend every waking moment consuming 40k lore videos on YouTube and listening to every Black Library audiobook in their sleep, and will recite the entire history of the Horus Heresy to you if you show even the teeniest bit of interest in Warhammer. Whilst these are the extremes, you can probably create some sort of graph like this to represent where your 40k interests lie. Moving these around, you can create some different archetypes that combine certain aspects. My own graph looks something like this, being mostly interested in the game, but with a decent interest in the hobby and a smaller amount in the lore. I like being creative and telling stories, but don't really have that much knowledge of the existing world, and I also use that creativity on the game side of things with my Screamer Raven supplement stuff. These graphs could be even more granular and could change depending on the game, the faction, or even if you just focus more on narrative or competitive. You may have a favorite one you love to play, but a different one that you'd like to read the lore on, and a third that you have no interest in playing but looks awesome and you want to paint them for displays. Let me know in the comments what you think your graph or graphs look like and what you most resonate with. And whilst you're there, like and subscribe because it really helps me out massively. If you want to support this channel further, you get all of these benefits by becoming a member or Patreon, like all of these fine folk. Your support means the absolute world to me and stops the creeping void from entering my mind and telling me that I'm worthless. My theory is that tournaments cater to people who have a graph that look closer to something like this, and maybe narrative events look more like this, both of which have a decent weighting towards the hobby side, and so having an unpainted mini will stick out and really detract from them. And a person's graph is not something that's set in stone, and is something that can fluctuate as they explore other areas of the hobby. Someone who first approached a game from a lore might look into the game, shifting the balance more towards it, and from there they then might want to paint some models after realizing the game is kind of cool. I believe that this shifting graph craft model is why grey models are absolutely okay outside of those big events. And being belligerent about only fielding painted models harms the game more than it helps. To be fair, I'm fully aware that a lot of these comments that I get or comments that people make about Unpainted Minis are made in good fun and aren't meant to be taken seriously. But sometimes it does feel like people get legitimately mad about it. And look, yeah, if I were to play against you and you have a rule of only playing with painted minis, then that's fine. It's your house and your rules. I'm not going to force you to play against my unpainted grey horse. A group of players usually works because their balance graphs are fairly similar, and whatever works for you works for you. But if you want to get new players into the game, you got to realize that unless they were a hobbyist already, they're likely going to want to play the game before they put a ton of hours into painting, only to realize they actually don't really like it. Even a keen hobbyist taking their first step into the game might have to use some unpainted minis or even proxies if they have just been painted whatever they think is cool and don't actually have a cohesive army. When I posted this picture of my first Spearhead game, I still got a couple of comments about the unpainted models. I'm guessing that these were made in good fun, and I'm absolutely fine with them. And as someone who is putting this stuff out publicly, it's fine. I'm absolutely fine with people commenting on it because people usually do it in a funny way. I'm big enough of a person to be able to take that in stride. But it doesn't upset me at all. Honest, it's fine, really. But I wanted to try out Spearhead, and I wanted to use the Stormcast. And I wasn't going to delay playing the game even further to spend time painting up the Stormcast Spearhead just to play my first game. If a couple of people pulled together to get Skaventide to try out Spearhead as new players to Age of Sigmar, which is a push-fit kit so easy to assemble, supposedly, I have thoughts on that, they aren't going to want to have to paint them all just to be able to play the game that they bought if they bought Skaventide with the goal of actually playing the game. Combat Patrol for 40k, being worse than Spearhead in every single way, still has a rule about giving 10 victory points for battle-ready armies. Why? Combat Patrol is your way of introducing players into the game of 40k. If I wanted a friend to put down nearly £100 on a Combat Patrol for an army they like, then play a game and at the end go, well, you did win by 5 points, but actually my army is painted so I win, that'd be ridiculous. I wouldn't, and I'm guessing 99.9% of people wouldn't either. But the fact that the rule is still there just shows there really wasn't much thought put into it. I am absolutely certain that this is not really a controversial opinion at all, and comments on the internet about painting your minis are generally just like a meme. But I think it's fine, and frankly should be encouraged to use grey models if you're getting into the game. Or if you've bought some new toys and you want to experiment with them, or you're just generally a busy person who doesn't have time to get a fully painted army before exploring and playing the game. If you're someone who wants to play once in a blue moon, and when you do you want that complete experience, then it makes perfect sense to not allow unpainted models. But that's a very specific balance graph, I think, and if that's how your group is, then absolutely, you're free to cast grey players into the fire where they belong. But letting people grey it up actually does have a positive effect. After playing this Spearhead game, I was actually more inclined to paint my Stormcast than I was before because I really enjoyed how they played, which surprised me. I was honestly just expecting to use them as a test for Spearhead whilst I got my Skaven sorted, but actually using them in game made me want to paint them more. And even before that, learning about the lore of the different storm hosts and finding out about the Knights Excelsior is what made me want to try them out in the first place. So that encouraged me to play them in a game, which has now also encouraged me to want to paint them more. So these three aspects of the Warhammer universe actually work well together when you allow them to play with each other and grow. In one of my very early videos, I said I wanted to get a 2,000 point army painted of either of my two main armies at the time, Drukhari or Thousand Suns. I've now achieved that goal of having a 2,000 point army of Space Marines because of my Screaming Ravens and the ideas from that. For me, that hobby creativity and the homebrewing encouraged me to actually try doing a crusade with them. And I enjoyed using the Vanguard Spearhead and Centurion so much that I got more into the hobby and the lore of them, which spiraled into going to a tournament. So again, it's the three aspects combining and flourishing together which really gets people involved in the hobby. And I've been talking about unpainted minis, but this system is not just for grey models, it works in all three aspects. Let people spout their silly lore memes that are surface level because it gets them involved and eventually they'll learn the deeper lore. Don't try to be all, well, actually, when people are just scratching the surface and having fun. Show off your first minis, and when people show them off to you, don't be super critical of them right off the bat. Make sure people learn to thin their paints, otherwise Daddy Rhodes will get you. But be encouraging, point out the good things. Hell, a painted mini, however badly painted, means that it's not grey anymore, and that's the goal, right? The greatest thing about Warhammer and tabletop games in general is these components working together, and the more that someone's graph covers all three aspects in whatever ratio, the more that benefits everyone. And most of all, it benefits me, because now you won't badger me incessantly about my unpainted minis. I can continue to do way more important things than painting, like finally getting this full art shiny Cravelox.